Hi everyone, welcome to the Active Knowledge series, Transition, Orienteering the Land Succession. Today we're stepping into Chapter 9, the Land of Wealth. Coming up you'll see as usual our orienteering map. The Land of Wealth steps out once we've gone through goals, family and legacy. It extends out from there and sits right beside, and honestly is quite joined with the land of business, but we look at wealth separately, then we step into the land of business. We can't actually finalise wealth until we really have a clear sense of business. And the reason why I say that is often wealth is generated from the business and resides in the businesses which the family owns and operates. But we do wealth first, we settle that as best we can, then in chapter 10 we will slide across the land of business. But today, the land of wealth, that is where we're going to be. It's interesting that land of wealth often causes the most heartache, headache, distress. There's probably some good words to apply to it. Because why? It's got to do with money. And the incumbent generation, that generation which is looking at the transition, initially they're saying, what does fairness look like? How do we share this? How do we transfer this over? And then on the other side, on the generation that we call the new generation, it can cause conflict. Who's entitled to what? And it's not just about money, it's also about control. So when we think about the land of wealth, it is about sharing the wealth, but it's also the allocation of control and the transition of control. But I think the point to note as we step into land of wealth, it does not have to cause this distress. It can be approached with sensibility and with a process which will allow everyone just to move through the land and to be, if I use the term, at peace, comfortable with the way in which it's been approached and decisions which are being made. The other thing which I'd say about the land of wealth before we actually step into it, if you remember the orienteering map, right back at the beginning, before we actually even moved into any of the lands, there was a little symbol there which said start here. I think we spoke about this in chapter 1. Chapter 1. And the heads up there was, before you actually begin your succession process, one, appoint an independent succession advisor, but two, there's a lot of information you've got to gather. And I hope you've done that, because in the land of wealth, we need to lift that information to the surface, because the land of wealth is one of detail, and if I just use the word verification, it is about where is the money. And often our thoughts about who owns what and how it may or may not be encumbered, once we actually try and find the paperwork and lift it up, we find that what we thought had happened had not happened. What we thought were the conditions are not the conditions. So the land of wealth requires a reasonable to high level of detail analysis to allow you actually to make the right decisions. Not what you thought things were, but where things actually are. So just that sort of preamble as we begin to step into the land of wealth. As always, what's our approach? Guiding principles, dangers, base camp. But before we go there, let's just think about the journey so far. So coming up on the screen, you'll see again our map, but the journey so far, goals, family, legacy, and then we're sliding across into wealth. Goals, family and legacy have given us a foundation. They may well have done a lot of the work we needed to do to actually complete the land of wealth and transition it well. The land of goals established for us not only recognition of that fundamental goal of succession, the compounding of wealth from generation to generation while ensuring family unity, individual growth and sense of contribution, but also allowed us to unpack the goals, the individual tailored goals which are relevant to us. If we look at the exit plans for each one of the lands, it may help us just remember. So goals was about setting those goals, not just that foundational goal, but the goals relevant to our family. We then stepped into the land of family, which was really about bringing the family together for this journey. It was about building the foundation of harmony. It was about creating communication and putting something in place where we would be communicating. It was very much about developing the family charter. And if we have developed a family charter, then in the land of wealth, a lot of the things we need to think about, we've already started to discuss and open. was about thinking also on the land of family, who might be our leaders in the future, who may play what roles, and can we bring together the whole family as a unified team to journey forward. We then slid across and stepped into the land of legacy. It's a slightly different connection there. Again, as you see us coming into land of legacy, it's slightly different because we're now reflecting from our viewpoint. We're now saying we're going to transition the wealth, however that may be formed, what shape it may be, across to the next generation. And as we do that, we're saying, what will be our legacy? And sometimes our legacy is about gifting, and that's fine, and we need to recognize that, and that becomes important. We need to draw that in the succession process. But as you remember from the land of legacy, the emphasis was our legacy is the business which we can transition over. And we'll talk about that a bit more in the land of business. But it was about the benefits which go with transitioning that business. And the land of legacy was getting us to have a recognition of that and really begin to think about what are we transitioning over. Are we just transitioning cash, or are we transitioning something which can create unity and purpose for the family? Who might be the leaders? What might be the governance structure? Who could be the next CEO? Who could be advisory board members? How do I make sure that my legacy doesn't create conflict but creates harmony and peace? So again, just going back to that map, these are the lands which we've gone through to provide a foundation for us to look at wealth and to look at business. And today we step into the land of wealth and begin to explore that. A land which is going to require some patience, lots of conversations, and a lot of understanding of detail. So when we begin to think about the land of wealth, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to go from that foundation of the three lands, and we're going to say, wealth. What does it comprise? Who legally owns it? How might it be encumbered? And if we were to think about sharing, maybe the word is allocation, not a good word, how might that match to the goals we have set? How might that support family harmony? How may that, in actual fact, help us seed the legacy we're trying to create? So we start off with this very fundamental approach, and then we begin to push into the detail. As always, guiding principles, dangers, base. Guiding principles, dangers, base, the base camp. So let's just talk about the guiding principles. And there's two guiding principles in the land of wealth. Plan early, start early, and the second one, equality is not equal. Bit of strange term there. Plan early, start early. Principle number 5 of our principles in succession. If you go back to the people who have completed their succession journey and you ask them, so what would be a single piece of advice you would give to those who are considering or about to start their journey? What would that piece of advice be? And almost without exception, that advice was start early, start as early as you can. So principle 5 is about getting the sensibility about the importance of starting early. And I think it comes back to that fundamental goal of succession, which is the compounding of wealth across generations. And as we begin to think about wealth and the transition of that wealth, we really need to step back and say, okay, if we're going to achieve this goal of compounding of wealth in the future generations, what do we need to be conscious of? And there's a few things which we can draw up. And these really come from the challenges which people who have gone through succession have faced. And there's probably 3 categories, I think, is the easiest way I could express it, of challenges. One is just lack of capacity. The inability of the business to provide for the financial needs of that exiting generation, combined with the inability of the business to provide for the needs of the new generation. Put the two together, the business is not strong enough, not profitable enough, there's not enough capital, there's not enough value to allow an effective transition. It's holding us back. That's one of the barriers. Second one is this sense of, I'll just use these words, the real struggle to find what equity and fairness looks like in transitioning the assets over, the wealth over. And often this comes back to how we've structured the business. It's all in one big lump. It needs to be divided up in some way, but we can't do it. So this sense of how have we built and structured the business with an eye to the family of the future. And the third one, again, two parts to this, best expressed as a lack of readiness. The existing generation is not really ready to release off to the new generation, and the new generation is not really ready to embrace and take the business over. So where does plan early, start early come into this principle? Why do we head it this way, title it this way? Well, if you think about lack of capacity, poor structuring of the business to support transition and readiness, you need to think about these much earlier, and you need to begin to work them through. You can't wait until it's sort of a 1 or 2 years and you think, oh, it's about time I stepped away from this business. Maybe I need to think about succession. It's far too late. Far too late. You need to be looking 5 to 10 years ahead at least and beginning to say, how's all this going to work out? How am I going to actually transition this off? You need to actually have a long view. I think very, very few people have that. Families which are doing multiple generation transitions, what I mean is they've done it before, they're doing it again, they're doing it again, they have that perspective. It's part of their DNA. But if it's the first or the second time you're doing it, there's that sort of, often that lack of forethought. So what do you need to do? You need to think about the future. You need to begin to create insights and understanding of what may occur. You don't know, but you're beginning to think of possibilities. You're beginning to address the barriers for readiness. You are preparing yourself, the incumbent generation, for an exit, and you're preparing the new generation for maybe taking over. You're beginning to think about how the business is being structured and how the pieces come together, and maybe rather than one big lump, it's broken into various entities and various parts of the business and business units which connect together. And the final thing is you're thinking about growth. How do I build the financial capacity of the business so it's not just suitable for me, it supports me and my family as it is now, but will support my children as they form their own families and it begins to grow. Plan early, start early is just a call out to not leave succession until the very end, so those barriers which can catch you out, lack of capacity, no flexibility or adaptability in the business, and a lack of readiness, don't suddenly restrict what you can do in succession. As I said, for those who have gone through the succession process, discovered through the global research which we've done, plan early, start earlier is a very single and important message. That was principle number 5. The second principle in the land of wealth is really the whole question of what wealth in one sense is about. And principle, this is principle 6, is equality is not equal. It's a bit of a weird expression, isn't it? Equality is not equal. And everyone goes, but quality is equal. Well, this is calling this out and asking you to think about this. And what it's basically saying is to achieve equality, to achieve harmony, it doesn't mean that everyone gets the same share, because there's different things to be shared and they have different roles to play in the family as it goes forward, and possibly even different roles in the family in which they have played. We want to achieve something which is fair and equitable, but we also want to support harmony and we want to support the compounding of wealth. And in this principle 6, there's just an expression which I'll call out now, and the expression is process is your friend. Process is your friend. In the land of wealth, we're seeking to create a process to determine what is fair and equitable in the allocation of wealth, the sharing of wealth, as it goes forward. And just keep in mind, when we talk about wealth, it's not just how much have I got. It is not only that, but it's about control, especially as you begin to get what I call active wealth transfer, where you have active businesses in which some of the family are in the business, some of the family may not be in the business. How do we actually achieve an equity through this? Some of the things you're going to have to think about in this equality is not equal is you're going to have to involve all family members. You've already started this, especially if you've created a family charter, and even through the land of family, you've started to have discussion with family members about, I'm thinking of a succession process, I'm thinking about what to do with the business. What's your thoughts? Where would you like to be? What would you like to see happening? You're beginning to engage very early in this discussion, and now as you step into the land of wealth, you're beginning to expand that discussion out. So you need to involve all the family members in the establishment of the process and the principles which we'll create a bit later. You certainly need to establish the principles. You need to be very clear on the basis in which you're talking about these, and you need to get everyone to understand. You seek their contribution and their participation. As you begin to create the principles, you're going to think about what is the impact on individual family members, and you're going to test the principles against that. You have to absolutely engage your partner, your spouse, in these discussions. They will be one of your champions in engaging the wider family in the discussion of where does wealth go, who controls, who shares what. And apart from that, you need to make sure they are included in the wealth allocation discussions, because if something happens to you, you need to make sure your partner, your spouse, is cared for and has access to a capital base. And then as you begin to go through this and all begins to come together, you've got to make sure everyone understands the decisions which are being made and are having the opportunity to speak into this. We need to be achieving two things: fairness and harmony. Equality is not equal. We need to achieve fairness and harmony, and therefore we need to think about how do we achieve the compounding of wealth in the future. So the rules coming out of principle number 6: principles first, test the application, consider fairness, then proceed. This is the way you need to achieve basically harmony as you go through the land of wealth and achieve an outcome which is not causing disruptions or stress in trying to make it. Plan early, start early. Equality is not equal. Two principles in the land of wealth which you really need to anchor yourself in to move through this land well. Let's now look at the dangers. Two dangers in the land of wealth, quite significant dangers, and the dangers tend to tie back, as you would have seen through the previous chapters, the previous lands, to the principles. To some extent, here's the principle. If you don't follow this principle, here's the danger, which it's going to is going to be unleashed to some extent. Two dangers. First one, empty treasure chest. Second one, greed and envy, a monster. So let's just look at each of these. Coming up on the screen again, you'll see circled in the land of wealth these two dangers: the empty treasure chest and the little monster there, and greed and envy and ego being the elements which it's chasing after. The empty treasure chest ties back into that lack of capacity. And here's the expression that goes with it: the traveller has failed to plan and prepare early enough and has not built sufficient resources to support the growing family and the business. If you have your children working in the business, then you need to recognize that their future financial viability, their wealth, is tied very much to the business. But even if you're just in the business by yourself, thinking about how do I support the next generation and the generation beyond that becomes quite important. So as I mentioned under principles, the lack of financial resources is often a barrier to effective succession. I've built the business to support my family. I have not built the business to support the wider family, which is my family and my children's family. And it begins to expand out from there as that group begins to grow bigger and bigger as it goes through multiple generations. How can I continue to grow becomes a real challenge at times, but you need to think about this. A growing family requires growing financial resources. You need to think about that, so you begin to think about the growth of the business. You need to think about the future needs of the family. The empty treasure chest, the danger is I haven't thought about this until the last moment, and now I realize I have not built sufficient resources. I did not grow the business in a way which allow me to fill the treasure chest. That's the first danger. Second danger really comes out of this question of fairness and equity, the second principle we spoke about. Again, the narrative that goes with this: family members are envious of the positions others have achieved, and personal interest and greed is overrunning the family. Conflict is there, division is there, people are not on board, people are in there grabbing what they can and aren't thinking about the compounding of wealth from generation to generation while ensuring unity, individual growth, sense of contribution. Greed, envy, ego, the sense of where I sit within the family, the sense of who's capable, who's not capable. These are things which you'll see teasing around in the sort of the icy relationships, the fiery relationships, which can kick up through family and through into legacy. They can be things which have created many, many, many years ago and can be from a prior generation and flow through. You need to, as you step into the land of family and then into legacy and up into wealth, you need to be thinking about relationships in the family. You actually want to be using the process to strengthen and renew relationships and to begin to build a new set of relationships if that is necessary for the future family generations. Pride, self-interest are often just pointed to as the cause of these. Often it's a failure to communicate. It's a failure to retain and live the future. And therefore, in the land of wealth, being able to establish principles, communicate them clearly, test them, and then roll them forward becomes quite important. I know why you're doing it in this way. I know why I'm getting this share and not that share. I am comfortable with that because I understand. But I think there's another aspect, and this comes back to this, maybe this start early, plan earlier. It's values, it's relationships. What have you seeded in the family from a very young age about the role of wealth, the role of the businesses, the role of family members contributing to it, entitlement, etc., expectations? Look back to these things, and these have a long tail. If you're tripping over and having problems here, you maybe need to think about what we may have seeded and how we can cure that. Opportunities for individual growth, creating essential contribution, humility as a family trait, combined with just great communications, will allow you to create this sense of fairness and equity and listening to people in the family as you go through the land of wealth. And that will quieten the greed and the envy. Dangers. Insufficient capacity, the empty treasure chest, and the other one, greed and envy, people. It doesn't have to be everyone, it can just be one person grabbing and trying to take as much as they can. You need to be very conscious. You need to address these very quickly. Let's now just step into the base camp. This is the core work in the land of wealth. As I mentioned, there's a lot of detail which has got to be prepared here. If you have your independent succession advisor on board, they should be and will be hopefully preparing this information for you. They'll be taking everything from you, gathering it in, liaising with your accountants and solicitors, and then presenting back to you, hopefully very simple as it can be, mapping diagrams of where wealth is and drawing out inconsistencies and things to be thought about. From there, you can then step into these questions of fairness and harmony. But until you've actually done the first part, mapping the wealth, you shouldn't really chase too far down the others, because quite honestly, you're not sure what you've got to allocate, and you may have thoughts about where you can give something, but once you go through the detail, you may find there's challenges and barriers associated with that. So let's just step a bit further into the base camp. The topics: where's the money? This process of mapping which we're going to go through. The second one, allocation, and that is about control and is about share. We're going to do about principles, we're going to test outcomes, and we're going to look at fairness. So two main themes in the base camp: where's the money and allocation. Establishing a principle, not finalizing it. As you step into this land of wealth and you begin to think about where's the money and especially allocation, you should be pulling forward your family charter with you and saying, we actually have started to draft this, we haven't finalized it, and we spoke about the things we wanted to do as a family in this family charter. We answered a lot of questions about control. We answered a lot of questions about who should be involved in what. Let's bring that with us, because that is our first guide. And the reason why I'm saying that is, if you did not do the family charter, if you have not gone through that process, maybe you should just pause where you are in the land of wealth and go back and complete that family charter, because that will answer a lot of the questions and give you a lot of information which you need to move through the land of wealth well. So just remember your family charter. If you haven't done it, I would be doing it. So let's do the first part in the land of wealth. Where's the money? Excuse that expression. You would think the answer to this question would be a simple one. We're dealing with families which have built significant profitable businesses, and at all different levels of size and complexity. They know their business as well. But sitting behind that has been a process where they've engaged their accountants, their taxation advisors, and their lawyers over several decades and have progressively created structures. And maybe during a period of time in which their family dynamics has also changed. As you get into this succession process and you begin to gather all this information and you begin to go through, you're checking the details. We actually want to see the corporate documents. We actually want to see the trust deeds. We actually want to read them. We actually want to see the banking and finance documents. We actually want to confirm who owns what and who controls what. And we actually want to go through and tick all of this off. So the number of times which you cannot find share script, who you thought was a director actually is not a director, who you thought were beneficiaries of a trust are not the beneficiaries of the trust, someone who you thought had no entitlement possibly has an entitlement. You're beginning to lift all of this to the surface. This is the preparation work in the land of wealth. You need to do this preparation, where's the money, before you begin to think about how things may be controlled and allocated in future. Because without the facts, you can't make those decisions. So this analysing where wealth lies in the family group and the corporate structure is a key succession process. It's critical before you move into any questions about who gets what. And hopefully the start here point in the beginning of your succession journey, you actually had done some preparation work, because it will allow you to slide into this quite quickly and not get sort of stuck because I now have to go and find everything. So we're going to develop a wealth map is the language I use. You're going to create a master listing of all the entities, the directors and their shareholders, the assets they own, the encumbrances which they may carry. You're going to prepare this in the form of a corporate structure diagram, and then you're going to map all the connections between the entities, intercompany loans, cross guarantees, family loans. We're mapping control and ownership, we're mapping value, and we're mapping connections. And we try and do this in a way which helps us understand what is where and how it all flows. An exercise which typically is not done until the succession process is there. So coming up on the screen, and you build these things initially just in Excel spreadsheets. Again, your independent succession advisor should be doing this for you. And you see I've just put on this one the heading of control. So I'm listing out on all the entities which I've got. What's the legal entity? Who are the directors and the office bearers? Who are the shareholders and the beneficiaries? How would I classify it? What sort of entity is this? And what other information is relevant? Are there charges? Are there debenture charges? Are there cross guarantees or something? So you begin to look at this initial listing of control. You're listing out all the entities in the group in whatever form or shape they may be. And you're verifying them against source documents. So you're building up folders, basically, of documents. Often happens. And actually locating and finding the documents and pulling them all together. Sometimes easier than other times. You're then taking that initial Excel spreadsheet and you're adding information into it. You're now talking about business type and value. So what actually is this entity? Is it a trading entity? Is it a property entity? Is it some form of investment entity? Is it a family or private entity which is going to be carried forward in some way? Who owns it? What percentage do we own within the family group? Are there other partners or other shareholders outside the family in there at percentage of control? Key financial data. What's its turnover? What's its net profit after tax? What assets does it have? Just a sense of that, because then we can go on to the next part is, so what would be a likely value of this entity? Just a rough figure, not valuations, just getting a sense of what we think it may be worth. So I've now created a listing of all the entities. I understand who in actual fact controls them, who owns them, and what the value of they may be. I then begin to map that. And this is a relatively simple map. They become more complex, obviously. You see the legend down the bottom: trading businesses, property development, investment holding, family private businesses, holding company, and then up to the ownership structure. And you see I've just broken this one up in several parts. If I look on I think it'll be on the right hand side for you, holding company 1 has trading company A, trading company B, trading company T, and it goes up into a trust structure. We then come into the center. We have a number of property companies. We seem to have a mixture between investment companies, trading companies coming up. So it's not a clean structure as such. It's going into a different trust structure. And then on the Other side, which is probably your left side, we've got some family companies coming up to, again, a family holding company group, which is owned directly by individuals. And you think about the trust structures and you think about who the beneficiaries are, and you're asking, where do we want to pass wealth to? These diagrams just allow you to reflect upon and understand how things presently exist and where entities are located. But you're not just looking at the entity, you're looking at the actual business operation within it. Because what I'm thinking about is how I'm going to transition control and ownership, and how that may work to build the compounding of wealth and achieve harmony. So it gives you a good sense of what businesses are sitting where, what assets are sitting where. But the complexity does not stop there. And excuse this next diagram, which I'm going to kick up, which is a bit messy. I've taken that corporate structure diagram and I've just dropped some spider webs across the top of it. Because what you next map are the intercompany connections. There will be loans, they could be bank guarantees, they could be security held. So what we're trying to see is the connections between them and how they integrate together. Because I thought the asset was owned here, and it is, but it's encumbered over there. It could be through an intercompany loan, it could be through a bank guarantee. So understanding how those interrelationships impact the structure becomes important. This is information, this is data, this is fact. We capture this, we get this right, we now have as best we can a clear diagram which allows us to then go forward and say, so how may we share ownership? How may we share control? How may we transition? And as we go into the land of business and we begin to think out, and what businesses do we want to keep? What businesses do we want to dispose of? You now begin to see the interconnections. So this basic work becomes quite important in the land of wealth. Don't skip over it, you need the detail. Before you think who you may give the wealth to, you must know who owns it and how it's interconnected. This is the development of the wealth map. Only then can you begin to think about how you may transition the family businesses over. A master list of all entities, the creation of a corporate structure diagram, the mapping of intercompany loans, cross guarantees, family loans, all sorts of things. Now I have a sense of what my wealth looks like, where is the money. Now I can begin to think about transition. It's the first task in the base camp. Again, your independent succession advisor should prepare this for you, liaising with your accountants and solicitors, and then be presenting this to you and going through it with you. And then you asking questions, that doesn't make sense, I thought this was this. And they go, oh my goodness, I hadn't realized that. And from experience, many things drop out of this process where you go, oh, I'd forgotten about that. That's the family. So, mapping's done, you're now beginning to move into allocation. And these things are not necessarily linear, but you want to try and make sure you've got the information before you begin to jump too far ahead. Allocation. Sharing and control is a good way to think about it. 4, compounding of wealth from generation to generation while ensuring harmony, individual growth, and a sense of contribution. This is the way you allow the family to grow into future generations. So what are the questions? How much do I actually have? Where is it held? And how is it all encumbered? Your wealth map. Thinking aloud. Thinking aloud. These are thinking aloud questions. What will pass to whom, when, and how? What will pass to whom, when, and how? How may this work? What might be the conditions associated with any transfer? How might this reflect fairness and equity, and why do I think that? And as I'm beginning to process this and tease out ideas and begin to just get my thoughts right, the exiting generation thoughts right, I'm thinking back to what? My goals. How are these things going to achieve my goals of succession? Family and the family charter. How is all that going to support harmony? And how's it going to work in the family? Because in the family, through that land of family, I've spoken to them about where they want to be, where they want to go to. I've lifted everyone's mind to this. And the legacy, what do I believe I need to do to seed a legacy which will push well into future generations? So I begin to answer these core questions and I begin to think about how all this fits together. And I start with principles. So my looking at the map, beginning to think about allocation, beginning to ask myself these questions, I'm actually beginning to say, and what are the principles which I'm thinking about? And you begin to write them down. Your land of goals is helping me see my summit. The land of family has got my family charter and I understand where everybody wants to be. My legacy is my sense of what I need to do to seed the future. I'm thinking about my children's wishes for the future. I'm thinking about their involvement in the businesses. And I'm going to keep in mind that I haven't yet gone into the land of business to develop necessarily clear strategy. And I'm going to do that, so there's a bit of tentativeness in this as well. Coming up the screen is some very, very, very simple ideas, examples, sample principles. All the children, I want to receive an equal share. Not sure what that means, but I want them to receive an equal share. I want to keep the wealth in the family, which means spouses, partners, I need prenuptials. I want it to go on a linear line through the generations. Partners are going to have to be provided for outside this. I want to have a robust governance system, and I want a family charter which evidences and supports that and creates all the documents. Why? Well, someone's going to have to be in control, but others are going to have ownership, and I want to make sure that works well, that doesn't create disputes. And I want a good governance process. 4, I need to involve the children in the management now. I haven't done this, so one of my principles in the land of wealth is begin to get them engaged. They know what is where. Maybe quite a few years yet before they get access, but I need to have them that experience. And I want that to somehow to come in this land of wealth and the principles we develop. Transition, ownership, only upon my death. I want to maintain that control. I'm going to get them involved in management. I want them to get the experience, but ultimate control will remain with me and my partner, with me and my spouse, until we are no longer here. And just on that issue, I need to make sure I make separate and adequate provision for my spouse. I need to make sure that there's not this sense of it's going to the children and my spouse has been left out. No. We need to make sure for both of us that we are provided for and cared for, and the children need to understand that. Not that they won't, but I just need to have those safeguards in place. So these are some of the principles I'm thinking about. And I'm now teasing around, so what might this look like in terms of the transition of wealth? And honestly, at that stage, you're going back to your corporate structure diagram, you're looking at that and begin to say, who's involved in what, and where might they all fit in, and what is the value of these relevant assets, and what might that mean in terms of fairness? So you're beginning to tease this out and you're beginning to get this sense. So I've now got some principles, I've gone back to look at my map, I'm now beginning to get some rough sums together. Now, what does this mean in terms of who gets what? And I'm looking at my wealth map and I'm seeing who's involved in what businesses, who's interested in what, and how all of that may flow through. Let me just freeze frame there and just give you an example of a family. Mum and dad, 3 kids, 2 sons, 1 daughter. All kids are adults. They have a business which has, what's the simplest way to describe this so it makes sense? Let's just call it a manufacturing operation, wholesale retail operation. They're a single line all the way through. We produce, we wholesale and we retail. Very significant, well-established business, good brands. Both my sons are involved in it. My daughter, she in actual fact is married and is living overseas and has a family overseas. I'm thinking about how I can exit this business and I can share this sort of wealth which we've built, which is quite substantial, fairly between the family members, and set that up now. My wife, myself, both still, we think, relatively young and good health, but we just want to deal with this now because we want to step away from the management of the business. There are external managers in the business and both my sons are involved. How does this end up? How does this flow through? Well, the daughter, I think quite sensibly turns around and says very early, Mum, Dad, I have nothing to do with the business. I've been out of it for a long time. I actually want no further interest in the business. If there's going to be some allocation, please just give me what you think is a fair share and pay me out. End result was, that's exactly what they did. They liquidated some assets. Here is your share. have a wonderful life. Choose that expression, but it's sort of, that was, easily done. Two sons was a much greater problem. Both sons wanted to be the next CEO, wanted total control, caused a lot of conflict, a lot of distress and angst within the family. But when they stepped back and actually looked at the structure of the businesses, that wealth map and how they created them, they go, well, hang on, you actually work in that part of the business, you work in that manufacturing side of the business, you run that quite well. You're over here, you're actually in the more wholesale into retail side, you run that quite well. They're quite separate and distinct structures. What about if we create a joint venture agreement between the two of you to maintain that connection, and you both take over those respective sides, and we'll balance up the fairness in terms of each one to make sure you both have sufficient capital. And actually, when we do that, these assets are surplus, we can sell them off and they will support us. So they were able to achieve what they believed was fairness and equity and harmony. It settled all the sort of angst which was there, because the daughter got what she thought was a fair and reasonable share and was out of the business and didn't have to think about that anymore. The two sons had businesses which were connected but could also grow quite independently, and they were of an equal value. And the parents had capital which they in actual fact could use for themselves. And they transitioned over a 5-year period to exit themselves out and to give the boys total control. And the daughter got the assets within about 2 years. So you begin to create your principles, and then you begin to see how, when you look at the structure and you think about the businesses and the other assets you've got, how will all this work? This is where we go on to the next part, where you go from principles first, rough sums second. And here's an example coming up in here. So these were the rough sums and initial thoughts of another family, small family business. Total wealth, $50 million. We think each one of our four children in this case, should get $12.5 million in equal parts. What they had forgotten at this stage was, but what about you, the parents? Where's the capital for you to continue? They actually had to go back and change this, but I'm just pointing that out now, that you can't just give it all away to your children, you've got to keep something for yourself. $30 million value in the business, $20 million in investments, properties and shares. Cash which they have earned through the business over the years, and they invest in other things. I'm thinking I'll retain ownership until death, but will pass management on sooner and begin to share profits with the kids when the succession plan is completed. I'll begin to exit, but I'll retain ultimate control for a while. Business has been good, but it's risky now, an unclear future. Children may be able to make it work, but may not. So where I say there's a value on the business, businesses have risk. Businesses require continuing investment, continuing leadership to work, as distinct from share portfolios, investment portfolios, cash. I'm thinking Jessica, one of the children, who is not involved in the business, should simply be paid out and have no involvement in the business. Don't assume, ask. And in this particular case, Jessica was happy to step out. Maybe Jessica gets $10 million clear from the investments, not 12.5, 10 million from the investments, and others take over the business and share the other $10 million. But if they sell the businesses within 5 years, then Jessica gets a share of the proceeds. So it was like a clawback provision. Now these sums changed because they had forgotten for themselves what they needed. So when that was put in there, the sums dropped. The kids got control of the business. Jessica was out. The parents, in actual fact, retained control for a period of time, but then surrendered it. But they had a dividend flow coming to them and some separate assets which allowed them to live. So you can see how you begin to play this out. Let's get all the facts first, and let's begin to think about what fairness looks like. So let's establish some principles. Let's test the principles. And now let's begin to, once we've got those settled, share them a bit and see what everyone thinks. So what were the steps? Map and understand where and how the wealth is held. Sharing and allocation, control. Establish the draft principles. Discuss them with the family. Apply them. Apply them and see how they begin to play out. You run the numbers. And you discuss them with the family to gain approval, to gain buy-in, to begin to seed harmony. You look at the structure. your wealth map. What can work? What will be fair? How may all this come together? You actually go back and you look at your family charter and you say, does that family charter need to be amended anyway, or is it quite consistent? Or do we need to amend our thinking to be consistent with the family charter? And the other aspect is, of course, goals. How does this support the goals? And the other thing I'll just put in here is sometimes there's assets which are not to be shared. There's assets which will be carried forward over generations. There's assets which are to be retained. So this is not always just a straight division. There's buckets, and buckets are shared in different ways. Your wealth map gives you a sense of how the bucket's positioned. Your principles are drawn typically from your family charter, and you begin to test those and express them. You begin to discuss them. You begin to see how everyone feels with it. You massage it in the shape. There's a bit of mediation, and then you come forward to say, this is where we think we have landed so far. But you can't finalise it and you don't finalise it. Because from the land of wealth, you need to step straight across into the land of business. And coming back to my initial comments, the business is often where much of the wealth and the future wealth is held. And you really need to have a good sense of where that business is going to go to before you finalise the land of wealth. In actual fact, goals, family, legacy, wealth, business, it's only in the land of decision that you pull everything together and crystallise it. Until then, they are thoughts and options, and you have not yet integrated them together. Land of wealth. You need to draw your wealth map. You need to locate and gather all the supporting documentation and tick it off. Not what I think or what I thought. You actually need to find it and locate it, and that becomes quite important. You seek legal advice where there's points in which there's lack of clarity about ownership, where control is not clear. And this becomes quite often in trust structures where you look at the expression of beneficiaries and you begin to say, oh my goodness, this is quite wide. Who may be involved in this? Who could potentially make a claim at some time in the future for an entitlement? Let us get advice and think about this. You seek legal advice. You write up your initial thoughts. Physically write them down. What might be the principles of allocation across the next generation? What assets may go to who, and why would we do that? Have I in actual fact provided for my spouse, who probably has a significant ownership stake in everything anyway? Don't forget that. Have I also made sure that the children are providing for their families and their spouses? And am I communicating well with the entire family about how I'm thinking all of this is coming together and working through any issues which may cause disharmony or conflict? It's the land of wealth. A lot of detailed, but also some real hard thinking about how's all this going to work in the future, where does everyone want to sit, and asking people to think about the future and begin to work it forward. I've set my goals. I've worked with the family to create a family charter and talk about where we want to go to. I've looked at legacy and see how that can be seeded in the future. I'm now in wealth, doing my homework, getting everything cleaned up and in the right spots, and I'm thinking about what transition may look like and how it may work in the terms of sharing and control. And control also is often expressed in better ways, responsibility. Next, I'm going to slide into the land of business. I'm going to try and nail that and then up into the land of decision. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. I hope the discussion through the land of family has just helped you to get some sensibility of how you can proceed through this and some of the things you need to do. Principles, dangers, and the base camp work. I hope they've been beneficial to you. And I hope to see you in the next land, the land of business, which I think might be chapter 10. All the best. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, it's Sally here. I work with Richard. You will see coming up on these next 3 slides a URL link to purchase Richard's transition guide, which is a 200-page full-color guide in either spiral-bound printed format or a digital PDF format, or both if you wish. A URL link to the page that contains Richard's blog, a library of over 500 articles on family business succession, business strategy, leadership, growth and competitiveness, which you can access freely. And finally, there is an email address for any questions you may have. These are great resources, and I commend them to you.